Jenna, and welcome everybody, and welcome to this Neighborhood Essentials panel to kick off the Philadelphia Heroes and New Normal Forum. Thank you to the teams at 17 Asset Management and Impact PHL who've been working hard to pull this off under difficult circumstances, so we appreciate that. My name is Dennis Price. I'm the Editorial Director at ImpactAlpha. We appreciate you joining us today. Obviously, the COVID crisis has impacted people in big ways and small, and so we really appreciate and value your time. I live in Austin now, but I'm very fond of Philadelphia. We were discussing her backstage. My family has deep roots in the city. I've lived in and out of the city enough to know how special it is, and I was there for the Super Bowl win a few years ago. At ImpactAlpha, we've been tracking and reporting on city-level revivals, local entrepreneurial ecosystems, place-based investing, more recently opportunity zones. And a lot of that work, frankly, began when I was living in Philadelphia. So when I say, I know, and now living outside of Philadelphia, of course, has its challenges, but looking across cities, few cities that I've covered have the level of coordination and sophistication and intentionality around solving those challenges. So I always think it's good to hear, people's work keeps them and their skills and passions in Philadelphia, but it is a bright light. I'm joined today by three mainstays in Philadelphia city leadership and real advocates of inclusive economic growth, all of whom know each other and work well together, or work often together and well, hopefully. Please welcome Ann Fadullon, the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia, Derek Green, a Philadelphia Councilmember since 2016, and Jeff Hornstein, who heads the Economic League of Greater Philadelphia. And Derek and Jeff, obviously you guys have very busy day jobs, especially now. So we also appreciate your time and joining us here and sharing your work and your thinking on these big ideas. So to jump in here, two things in my mind have really, and we were also discussing this backstage, define the U.S. sort of pandemic experiences. One is the disproportional impact on communities of color and low-income communities. And also that the response, frankly, has been really driven by local actors, almost neighborhood to neighborhood. And I think that presents all sorts of challenges, but also opportunities. So I wanted to start with Ann. Ann, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm good. My family is healthy. My friends are healthy. I've had some staff that have gotten the virus, but most of them have recovered, unfortunately. We've also had some loss of family members among our staff, so it's been a hard time, but overall, we're doing okay. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Really appreciate that.
Well, as a city planner, I'm imagining you're experiencing both sides of seeing the challenges of how COVID is impacting communities and the disproportionate impact on neighborhoods in Philadelphia, but also the sort of the bright spots of residents drawing on assets and neighborhoods and experience to respond. So I wonder if you can give a bit of context and ground the discussion a bit, and just how has COVID impacted Philadelphia for those that are watching that are outside of the city?
Right. So I think that the virus has impacted Philadelphia like it's impacted a lot of cities. But I think in some ways we were well equipped to deal with the virus, although we've had a number of cases. Most of those cases really have been in congregate living type of facilities. So I think there's probably going to be a conversation about that to be had. But because of the robust sort of eds and meds, particularly medical facilities, life sciences, that kind of industry in Philadelphia, we've really been able to handle the medical impact, if you will, on the city. So, our hospital, we've had sufficient hospital beds, we've had sufficient medical staff, that's been, I think that's been a plus for us. We have had challenges, around food access. And I think that's a real opportunity, with so many things shutting down, including the school systems. We realize, and we've known this, right, that the schools play a huge role in food access for a lot of our children, but also a lot of just our families in general. So I think that's been brought to the forefront. Sort of some of our pluses and minuses about our mass transit and our public transit. We're very lucky to have a very robust system, but we've seen what happens when that system gets challenged. And then I also think, the issue around housing and homelessness, and how do we better serve that population? I think, sort of the temporary quote unquote solution has been shelter, but shelter isn't exactly the best place to be when you are experiencing a virus that gets transmitted the way COVID does. So rethinking that, I think is a great opportunity for us. So I think overall the city's managed as well as it could. But I also think some of the challenges, particularly to the city of Philadelphia, is our tax structure. So while a lot of cities will be challenged because of the shutdown of business and not being able to pay business taxes and property taxes and those kinds of things, the other challenge to Philadelphia is our heavy dependence on the wage tax. So it's almost a double whammy. So not only are those businesses not able to pay their regular business taxes and their commercial property taxes, and the folks that have lost their jobs have an impact on their ability to pay their taxes, but also because of our wage tax, when those jobs aren't happening, that is a decrease in our tax base. Plus we had, we taxed our suburban residents that came into the city to work. If they continue to work at home, we're not getting that wage tax in as well. So I think that tax structure has been a little bit of a double whammy with the city of Philadelphia as well.
Yeah, we're hearing nationally, and I feel like every day it's getting worse in terms of the economic fallout, and particularly the impact on small businesses and frankly small businesses not having as easy access to some of the loans, the forgivable loans that have been put out, or some of the stimulus. How would you characterize the economic fallout, and how are small businesses in Philadelphia doing?
It's devastating. I'll just say that. I think it was very hard for, just as you mentioned, small businesses to get access to capital. And then it's even a bigger hurdle for minority-owned businesses or Black and Brown-owned businesses. I have to say, we're in a city of Philadelphia where we have a majority Black and Brown population, so we shouldn't be referring to them as minority anymore. But if you're a Black and Brown business, it's been even more difficult. And then if you add a layer onto that, that you are an immigrant Black and Brown small business, sort of the perfect trifecta of not being able to get access to capital. But we know that so much of our innovation and how we're going to handle these kinds of incidences like the pandemic, and how we're going to come out of them and how we're going to grow out of them, is dependent on exactly those types of businesses and that type of innovation. So it's more incumbent than ever to try to get capital to those types of businesses and industry. And I think overall, the virus has just borne out how great our disparities still are. Our disparities were great before we came into this. The pandemic has really just shined a spotlight on all the things that Councilman Green and Jeff and we've been talking about our whole careers. It's sort of like, hey, here it is. And now there's a big spotlight and floodlight shined on that. And I think, before we sort of move on, I have to at least mention the spotlight on the digital divide and what a huge impact that has when this type of situation happens, when you're required to stay at home, but you don't have a home. You're required to educate at home, but you don't have any internet and you don't have access to tech. And even if you did, no one in your household has familiarity with it, and you really don't understand how to fully utilize it. Or if you have to work from home, but you have a job that is not tech friendly or doesn't allow you to do that. I mean, just all of that sort of, it just grows exponentially because of that huge tech divide that we have.
That's great. I want to, let's put a pin in a few of those topics and come back to them in terms of how the city's responding, and frankly, how it was responding to those issues pre-crisis, and how we can sort of double down on those and make them part of the new normal going forward. I want to bring in Derek. Derek, how are you holding up?
I'm doing well. We are adjusting to this new normal. Everyone has been participating in all these different communication systems like we are today for this panel and this whole conference. I think we've all learned Zoom, Skype, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Slack, Blue Jeans. My wife and I have a running joke that we've done about 12 different communication systems over the past number of weeks, and we've learned how to, you can't be on Zoom while you're on Microsoft Teams and vice versa. So we're really adjusting to this situation, this new normal. I feel like I'm working probably more than ever because I wake up on the phone, and I sometimes feel like I'm going to bed on the phone with a little workout in between. But it's great to have this opportunity to have this conversation. There's a great panel, Impact PHL and 17 Asset Management. Thank you for putting this together, and Dennis to participate with you. I know you left Philadelphia to go to Austin, but we can always bring you back. I'm sure Jeff and Ann will welcome you back into the city along with myself. So
It's always on my mind.
Come home, right.
So Derek, I wanted to jump right into a good example because I think there are a lot actually coming out of Philadelphia at the moment. A group of African-American doctors have partnered with churches in Philadelphia, have played really a key role in ramping up testing, for example, in some of the neighborhoods disproportionately impacted by COVID. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that came together?
Well, just kind of following up on the comments that Ann made in reference to small businesses and the fact that this COVID-19 pandemic has had a very unfortunate impact on Black and brown communities in the city of Philadelphia and also around the nation, but particularly here in the city of Philadelphia. We are a city that's the largest big city in the nation with the highest level of poverty. So this pandemic has really exacerbated all those issues in reference to small businesses, healthcare issues, and others. And so Dr. Ayla Stanford, who is an entrepreneur, she has a business called Real Concierge Medicine. She knows the disparate impact that COVID-19 was having on African-American community. And so she took it upon herself as an entrepreneur to start this testing initiative where she was able to reach out to other doctors. And I've known Ayla for some time. My sister's also a physician who's now in California. And so a lot of my sister's friends who are located here in Philadelphia came together. Initially, they were doing testing almost door to door. Dr. Stanford is a member of Salem Baptist Church of Roslyn. The pastor there, Reverend Marshall Mitchell, kind of brought Dr. Stanford with some others together and said, let's go to various churches around the region. Churches, many churches own their own property, have their own parking lots. And so started doing testing at these churches around the city of Philadelphia, from North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia. Recently, they've done testing in Pottstown. They've done Broad Alney. So they're averaging about 250 to maybe 300 tests per site. And they've been doing testing every other day and really digging into their own pockets to buy tests from LabCorp. They have been raising money, but they're really doing this on their own. It's really self-determination and doing what has historically happened in the African-American community. And you've seen the vital role of churches in this pandemic, providing healthcare and access to services. And that continues a thread we've had in the city of Philadelphia, going all the way back to 1737, when Reverend Richard Allen and Absalom Jones founded Mother Bethel AME, which is the longest and oldest continually owned parcel of land in the United States owned by African Americans. So this shows the continuity from Reverend Allen and Mother Bethel to now Reverend Marshall Mitchell and other churches around the region, and then partnering with entrepreneur like Dr. Stanford to provide access to healthcare and provide a vital needed service to people in the African American community.
Two things I love about that. One is sort of the role of the church and the institution in a neighborhood in a response like this, where the government is, not that city level necessarily, but broader levels of government have failed to respond. So the role of that institution, but also the social mobilization that we're going to get to test, and we're going to test people, and we're going to look out for ourselves. What has the city taken anything away from that effort, or are there other such mobilizations going on in Philadelphia on the public health side?
Well, from my perspective as a council member, I introduced a resolution with my colleagues in the Bass to really look at the disparities coming out of this COVID-19 crisis and how we can address that from a city perspective. Just yesterday, the city issued an RFP for community-based testing. And I think there's been some pressure being put on the administration to bring in groups like Dr. Ayla Stanford and the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. And so the city did issue that RFP yesterday. I and a number of council members reached out to the administration by way of a letter saying we'd like to see some funding for groups like Dr. Stanford so we can get that community-based testing to as many people as possible. But this has been a real challenge because from my work as a member of council, I'm also on the board of the National League of Cities and also first vice president for the Pennsylvania Municipal League. And when I talk to my colleagues around the country, cities have been literally battling each other to get that PPE or personal protective equipment. So Philadelphia is in competition with Chicago versus LA versus the state of Washington versus Illinois. So this has been a real challenge. And so something like what the Black Doctors have been able to do, and now the city is moving forward with an RFP, I think we're trying to move the needle to get as many people access to testing, which is very important. I think it also has demonstrated for various people that this is a very, very important issue. Two friends of mine, Reverend Alan Waller from Enon Baptist Tabernacle Church, he identified as being positive for COVID-19, wasn't going to get a test, but got tested just to show to others that testing is okay. And then also another friend of mine, Ken Lawrence, is a commissioner of Montgomery County, just got tested over the weekend. Once again, not going to get tested, but since he was there, did get tested and found that he was positive with COVID-19. So this is a very, very important issue, very serious issue that's impacting everyone around the city and around the country.
That's great, and that the city's moving behind to get behind some of those community-led initiatives as well. Let's bring in Jeff. Jeff, and I will ask, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm living the pandemic dream. Exercising, cooking healthy every day, so that's been a positive. Reading a lot, and as an extreme extrovert, it's killing me. But I'm really taking this time to look inside my big self here. I wanted to say thanks to our friends at ImpactPHL too for putting this together. This is a great event.
Jeff, you had a piece in Billy Penn, and shout out to Billy Penn, who's doing awesome, a local publication in Philly.
Manager's the best.
You're doing really great stuff, covering pandemic response in Philly and everything Philly. But you had a piece last week that talked about how Philadelphia eds and meds, you hear this, for those outside of Philadelphia, education and medical institutions. Philadelphia has a lot of them. How Philadelphia institutions in neighborhoods spend their money in the aftermath of the COVID crisis will really be a determinant of whether this is an equitable post-pandemic economy or not. How is Philly organizing the institutional demand for services in neighborhoods?
That's a great question. Let me start by saying a little bit about the economy. So we've been around for 111 years, right? We've been through World War I, we've been through Spanish flu, we've been through the Depression. In fact, this is the 1931 edition of our Citizens Business Journal, which used to come out weekly, supported by the business community, as we still are, 60 corporations and organizations on our board, an incredible board. So we've been here before. Right? We've been through crisis before. This too shall pass, as people may have read about early in this crisis when there was a little bit of controversy about whether we should have the St. Patrick's Day parade. Philadelphia was the top casualty city during the Spanish flu pandemic. So these things, we've been through this before. Our leading indicators newsletter has been focusing on the disparate impact of this pandemic. And just to echo something both Ann and Derek alluded to, this pandemic has really told us nothing new, except it has shown like a real Klieg light on pre-existing inequalities and inequities, and our lack of resilience, I would say, not just as a city. I think the city is doing better in a lot of ways than the rest of the country, but you know, our supply chains are decrepit in a lot of ways. I mean, it's amazing to me that a $20 trillion economy can't get masks into people's hands, right? It's stunning. Like I've been getting, and as we all have been, emails from people, I can get you masks from China. Like it's incredible that we got a black market. I feel like we're in the Soviet Union, people are signs up, we have toilet paper, right? How did we get here? So the real question for me is, will we waste this crisis, right? This crisis is a huge opportunity to do things differently. As we've shown and others, that small businesses have virtually no cash on hand. As Ann said, if you're a small black and brown owned business, like you're in a real bind. But we're really lucky. We have this amazing cadre of anchor institutions here. That's the term of art we use for businesses and organizations that aren't going to leave the city no matter what we do to them. And the University of Pennsylvania really invented this strategy, right? I need to give a huge shout out to Judy Roden and John Fry back in the day. They invented the buy, hire, live local strategy, right? It's become a national model. But they invented it in the early 90s. Drexel, CHOP, Jefferson, Temple, they've all been doing amazing work as individual institutions. They came together in West Philly to form the University City District in the mid-90s. So we have all this infrastructure that organizes institutional economic power, right? The procurement strategy has been a little bit less well organized in Philly. You know, Penn does an amazing job with their institutional spend, Drexel does too, but the Economy League, when I took over a couple of years ago, we decided to pull all the institutions together around one table, right? So we've got Penn, we've got Drexel, we've got CHOP, we've got Jefferson, we've got Temple, all together $5.3 billion a year in spend on stuff. That's a technical term. And what we've discovered through our research is that there's a huge amount of room to localize and diversify. So we've done a lot of work on identifying supply and demand gaps between what these institutions spend and what our local market can produce. And that's where we really need to focus our energy. So we've been working with these institutions for the past couple of years, aligning the procurement professionals around an aggregate demand strategy, identifying verticals where we can where there's potential to localize and diversify, and then trying to work with our local business community.
So what I think is also interesting to you, the piece that you wrote in Billy Penn, is this idea of organizing and supporting the supply side of that chain, which are the local businesses. And of course, if they can meet that demand in the system, it sounds like they can. Sorry. But excuse me. But they, what you laid out some interesting points around what can be done on the supply side to support local businesses to meet that demand for local procurement.
Well, look, that's the key, right? If the market worked perfectly, we would have demand flowing to local supply, right? So there's a big market failure here, one could say. And what we've been pushing for is sort of a local form of a hyper-local form of import substitution economics, not to get too wonky, but like the path to growth for local people of color-owned businesses, one path is through institutional supply chain, right? There's two paths to wealth creation in America. One is through home ownership and the other is through business formation. We have a very low rate of black and brown business formation and an even lower rate of black and brown business growth, right? So what are the levers that we can push grow without worrying about what's going on in DC or in Harrisburg, right? So we have identified two main problems, that there's a scale problem and that there's an access to capital problem, aside from the institutional barriers. So the organizations on the demand side are willing to use their economic power to push down their supply chains and say, let's lower some barriers to access. Let's change the way we do RFPs. So you know, Derek Green Incorporated, who makes this great widget, you know, can access the supply chain. But without But you know, what does Derek Green Incorporated need to do to be able to get access to Aramark supply chain, for example? Aramark is a big supply chain integrator that stands between Penn and the local businesses, right? That's how most of the institutional supply chain works. So our strategy has been to work with the institutions to get them to get their big supply chain intermediaries to change the way they do business. And they're set up to do that. Then there's an access to capital problem. One of the reasons that we've been so excited to build deeper relationships with Impact PHL, which actually sort of spun out of Economy League research to begin with, is that there's a capital access problem. Minority-owned businesses in this country have generally been kind of pushed towards the CDFI world, which is great. The community development financial institutions are amazing, but they mostly provide debt capital. So you've got all these Black and brown businesses that are swimming in debt. The path to growth, as my mentor and friend Della Clark from the Enterprise Center taught me years ago, is equity capital. So we've been starting early conversations with Impact PHL, and we have a big grant proposal in right now to create something called the Impact PHL Hub, which will hopefully set up some funds for equity to create a sort of minority-based venture capital facility in Philadelphia so that these businesses will have a path to growth. The other thing that we're trying to fund right now, and any of you out there in the world of philanthropy, please open your checkbook right now, is called Page Prep, right? So we need a specifically tailored procurement program that helps a local diverse business understand what needs to be done to get into supply chain and supports them to do that. So it's going to be one part sort of boot camp, and we've got commitments already, soft commitments so far, but we're getting there, from consulting firms and other professional services firms to help provide the very specific assistance to businesses that they may need. They may not have the proper kind of financial back office. They may need help with HR. There's all sorts of things you need to do to go from a small business of $100, $200, $300,000 revenue to 5, 10, 15, 20 million, which is when you become a job creator. So those are the things that we're really focused on, but we're lucky. We have incredible institutional leaders here: Amy Gutman, Madeline Bell, John Fry, Dick Engler, Steve Klasko. You really couldn't ask for better leadership.
I want to bring back in Ann and Derek now for sort of a group conversation around, it seems you guys have, one thing you've identified is that the crisis has exacerbated known challenges. But I think all of you, and I think a lot of folks on this call, sort of, had been working on those challenges pre-COVID. What's the opportunity at this time, and what are some of the initiatives to make sure some of that work that you all were doing pre-COVID becomes part of the new normal, and ensures that folks, perhaps being hit hardest now, are part of that recovery? So Ann, what should be on the audience's radar in terms of things that we're working or things that were in the works to get at some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I have to say, there was things in the works that, but prior to COVID, Philadelphia was very much a city on the rise. We had been experiencing a period of extended growth that we hadn't experienced for literally decades. And so with that came the benefit of some additional resources and with additional resources often comes the opportunity and, kind of the advantage to think about things in a different way, and how do you come up with different solutions, because now you've sort of got the luxury with additional resources to be able to do that and think about things a different way. So, I'll just talk a little bit about probably what's near and dear, closest to my heart, which is in the housing world and in affordable housing. And I think, we were starting to really make some strides about trying to think about how we approach the housing issue in a different way. But most importantly, I think we were understanding how important housing is. That even though it was sort of in the background and in everybody's minds for a long time, it had just only recently risen to the top to understand if we were going to deal with our high poverty rate, and we were finally starting to make some inroads with that we really had to have more than a one or two-legged stool. right? And prior, the two legs were first the leg was education, right? And then another leg was added, was education and job. And I think folks really started to understand, well, education, job, housing, and we now really understand it's health as well. And so how do you really understand that you have to be looking at this holistically? You can't just say, oh, if we just pour all our money into education, or we just pour all our money, and you really have to look at that whole spectrum. And so I think in the housing realm, where we were starting to think about things a different way, how we could fund things a different way, what kind of programs could we implement, how would we allow government to sort of be the little piece that needs to be in the mix as opposed to the whole animal that needs to be in the mix? How could we leverage other sectors, the private sector, philanthropy, that kind of thing? I think that thinking still goes on, and there's a huge opportunity. And I think the opportunity is this. Government in these types of periods has a tendency to kind of contract, given its resources and its stress points along a broad spectrum. And when they're in a period of contraction, they kind of revert back to what are the basic things, public safety, street, that government has to provide, instead of keeping an open mind and realizing, oh my gosh, this is a huge opportunity for us. So an example of this in the housing realm is, we just stood up a rental assistance program because we understand if renters don't pay their rent, and we have a bunch of small landlords, just like small businesses. We have small landlord that provides the bulk of our affordable housing. If those landlords go into foreclosure, the risk of us losing control of our housing market in the city is huge. And we've seen this in other cities in the recession. What happens is a bunch of these smaller units goes into recession, the bank, or into foreclosure. The bank gets them. They don't know what to do with them. They don't want to sell them off one at a time. They package them. Big conglomerates come in and buy a whole package, and all of a sudden your housing market is controlled by conglomerates. And we already know that the private market is looking at this again. Ooh, here's another opportunity. Well, the public sector needs to look at this as an opportunity as well. Well, maybe this is the opportunity for us to go in and gain some further site control, or some better ability for permanent affordability around these units, or to think about how do we house our homeless folks in a different way, that it's not necessarily just shelter beds or some of our traditional methods, but this is an opportunity for the public sector in the housing market as well to utilize the private sector, philanthropy, impact investors, and figure that out, and not just say, you know what, we're going to hand over our housing market to other conglomerates. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for us to think more progressively, and not just, and to try to not go into that sort of retreat mode that the public sector often does during times of recession or economic shrinkage as opposed to growth.
Are there vehicles or examples where private investors that may care about affordable housing, let's say impact investors, some on this call, are there vehicles either in the works or that have been demonstrated in Philadelphia that impact investors can put money into, as the public sort of leads the definition of what that is, but it perhaps doesn't want to be?
Yeah, so I think we learned from our workforce housing program, which is a national model and actually won the National Housing Award from ULI, which is we took our publicly owned land and we provided it at a nominal cost and said to the private sector, you can build a unit and it has to be affordable at a certain level, but you go build a unit. You don't need us involved in that. You figure out how to make that profitable. And they did. But they came back to us and said, you know what else we could use is sometimes for our smaller contractors, our Black and brown contractors, it'd be helpful to have credit enhancement because it's hard for them to access the construction financing. So we came up with a credit facility and we provide that at a certain term to help support. But again, that got us out of the capital investment business, which is where the cost gets crazy. We come in with all these requirements, and the private market is able to provide a unit at a much more reasonable price than we are, and make that work. So that's what we learned. You know what? We just need to be the little drop in the bucket as opposed to the whole big animal. Yeah. That led to our down payment assistance program, same thing. provide some down payment assistance, activate the private market, huge success. So the next thing that we were about to stand up right before the virus hit, and which we are now standing up, in fact, my meeting after this is to hopefully get that finalized, is our Housing Accelerator Fund. And we will provide an initial public investment into the fund, hopefully $10 million. And that money will sit there at the bottom of the fund on the balance sheet to provide credit enhancement and some loan guarantees. And we're hoping that that then attracts private investment, and we can put that money back out into the housing market as patient capital, a little bit more flexible capital. It can take a little bit higher risk than traditional capital, but there's ways that we can leverage the private market and get that worked. And I think we're really looking at the belief that we have funded affordable housing upside down in this country for too long. We should not be funding the capital expense. We should figure out how to support the operations, because the private market can deliver the actual unit and the bricks and sticks much more efficiently than the public sector can. But we understand that the population they're trying to serve cannot support the debt and all the costs, even on the private sector side. So we need to be able to support the operations. And I think that's something that we're really trying to look at and advocate for.
That's great. That's great. Derek, you have a good opportunity lens. You've talked about that. Where are the opportunities at the moment? Not just from an investment standpoint, but where are some of these challenges the cities are facing? Where is that? Where are those places where if you look a little deeper or understand risk a little better, there is opportunity to get involved?
Well, from my perspective, I think the opportunity is for us to do things differently. And I think if you listen to both Jeff and Ann, both have had experiences both in the public sector and also the private sector. And too often there's a reluctance to blend and see the best that both can do. Someone that started in the private sector as a small business lender, I've been an entrepreneur, I'm an attorney that's represented small businesses. I know there's some things the public sector does very well, there's things that the private sector does very well. And I think we can't be afraid to embrace both ideas. Since we've gone into this pandemic, I've reached out to people in administration, like our chief administrative officer, to look at how we can do a better job of procurement, similar to some of the things that Jeff talked about earlier. A few years ago, I was able to get legislation passed to create a local business purchasing initiative to make it easier for local businesses in the city of Philadelphia to do more business with the city, because we need to find a way to help grow businesses, especially Black and brown businesses. Jeff is very right in reference to a lot of our businesses are debt laden, and we need to get them more into the equity phase. And as someone who's been a banker, I've also been a securities attorney, that's something that we need to do. And I think we need to really look at how we can grow our businesses and provide those opportunities. I think for those who are on this call, when you look at return on investment, too often when we're talking about investing in Black and brown companies, we're doing that from this is a feels good diversity and inclusion perspective, when really it's a return and also return on investment opportunity, because you're going into markets and opportunities, we're going to get a greater return, take a little more risk, but you're going to get a greater return. And that's what I think most investors are looking at, is how can I maximize my return? Some of the market and some of the investments that people have traditionally done, you're not going to get but so much return. And it's those who are willing to take that initial opportunity to invest in businesses like the businesses we're talking about can provide a return on investment that's going to benefit them as an investor, but also invest and benefit cities like Philadelphia. Now, what we need to do as a city, we have a high poverty level, and we really need to have a strong jobs and equity inclusion perspective. Because when we can grow the base of successful businesses in the city of Philadelphia, that's going to provide more revenue to the city of Philadelphia, and we'll ultimately be able to reduce our taxes. We've grown the base of successful companies in our city, and it'll provide more dollars for us for our general fund, more dollars for our quality of life improvements that we want to do. And so for me, as I listen to both my panelists, and they both talked on this as an opportunity, and it makes me think about a call I had early in this pandemic And prior to the call, we had a chance to read an article from McKinsey about how they viewed this pandemic. And they looked at this pandemic from a 5-point perspective. The first point is resolve. It's like getting hit in the face and you don't know what happened. You're just trying to get a sense. And then resiliency is, okay, now we've got to be resilient. We got hit in the face. What's next? And then we start focusing on the return, trying to get back to where we were. The last 2 points they talk about is reimagination and reform. And too often the public sector, as Ann said, starts to retreat a little bit. The private sector will also think about trying to return. But using this additional time when we have conversations like this to really think about reimagination and reform. And both the comments that and ideas that Ann has talked about and Jeff have talked about give that insight of reimagination and reform. Because we have to think of how we're going to come out of this. Generally, it takes about 3 or 4 weeks to change your habits. Now, we've been in this for well over 8 weeks. And so we need to think about how we can do things differently and have the city do things differently in reference to helping to promote things like this equity inclusion lens that we're talking about, entrepreneurship, some of the housing things that Anna's also talking about, and getting the city to move forward and embrace ideas from the private sector. From my perspective, the city of Philadelphia is in the attraction and retention business, and we have to do a better job of retaining companies and retaining constituents and attracting companies and attracting constituents. And those cities that do that are the leading cities coming out of this pandemic, are the ones that everyone's want to be in going forward.
Great. And I want to bring it, save some time for questions, but I wanted Jeff just to, if you could speak to where are the opportunities at the moment that you see to
As my mentor and friend John Street used to say, I will be brief no matter how long it takes.
Where's your red suit?
it's hanging next to my other velour suits.
Don't forget to drink your water.
So Ann and Derek are awesome, aren't they? And that's one thing I want to give a shout out. We have some great public sector leaders in this town. I know there are some people who love to crow about city council and blah, 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 but we have great leadership, and this is an amazing example of it right here. So a couple of bright spots I want to focus on that we just need to accelerate, right? The West Philly Skills Initiative has shown us a new model for workforce, how to do it in connection with employers. We were fortunate to get chosen by the Lenfest Foundation and Temple University to do the Lenfest North Philly Workforce Initiative strategy, which is putting together a collective of workforce providers and employers in North Philly, 175,000 people in North Philadelphia who've been disenfranchised from the workforce for a variety of reasons, and we've got a pretty sophisticated strategy to get them back in. So without solving the workforce problem in our city, that's going to be a huge drag around our neck, but we do have good strategies to do that. There's a related project, and Dennis, you folks at ImpactAlpha have written about this, Healthy Town Tioga project, spearheaded by a board member of ours, Anthony Miles, a Economy League board member, who's going deep in one neighborhood, right? And this will be a national pilot. This will be a national model of building market rate housing in response to a community plan, rebuilding a commercial corridor, and focusing on a health and wellness program for a neighborhood. And we've been doing a lot of the consulting work, our consulting arm led by a super sharp woman named Mahona Sadiq, who's worked for us for a couple of years, really drilling down deep into what the health and wellness needs of that neighborhood are and connecting it, as Ann was saying earlier, to this comprehensive strategy around housing, support, food, nutrition, wellness, all that sort of stuff. We're launching a project with Blue Cross in the not too distant future to really focus on some of these issues. Two other things I'll say: we're pulling together all of our Eds and Meds anchor institutions this summer for a leadership summit, and pleased to report that we're getting buy-in from some of the larger, more anchored corporations, so that we can expand the institutional purchase network beyond just the Eds and Meds sector, because frankly, Comcast's annual spend is $15 billion. They're the best diverse supplier on the planet, founders of the billion-dollar roundtable, along with Exelon, Pico. Aramark does amazing work in this space too. We're going to pull them all together and figure out how we can actually amplify this purchase. And then the last thing I'll say is that the Economy League runs something called the Greater Philadelphia Leadership Exchange. Anna is an alum. We take people to other cities, and basically we come back and say, well, same thing you said at the beginning, Dennis, Philly actually does some stuff pretty well. That's generally the takeaway. I remember Anne being very excited when we came back from Seattle. She's like, man, everybody thought Seattle was going to be so great, but like Seattle doesn't even have a transit system. Like, it's just, median housing price has gone from $200,000 to $750,000 in 20 years. There's not a single working class person that can afford to live in Seattle. Seattle woke up one day and said, damn, who's going to like take out our trash? I worked for the janitors union for almost 10 years. Like, these are the things you have to think about if you're going to have a successful city that doesn't gentrify its working class out of the city. So
where would we be without our essential workers right now?
Right, exactly.
If they're essential, why don't we treat them that way?
Exactly.
Or pay them that way.
And pay them that way. We're, shout out to my former employer, SEIU 32BJ, which, does the best job in the country of organizing low-wage workers. But we're putting together our Greater Philadelphia Leadership Exchange. This time is going to be like this hybrid solutions workshop. We're going to be putting together mastermind teams of the best minds in the city. We have 1,100 alums. We're going to be drawing on all of them to put together plans in about 8 or 10 different solutions verticals. And we're going to run it sort of like an incubator and accelerator model. And in October, we're going to have a big solutions showcase to lay out a plan for equity and resilience, because those are the two themes. Our GPlex director is a brilliant young woman named Opiola Bucola, and her tagline for this is inclusive agility, because we have shown ourselves deficient in both of those things. We're not inclusive enough, and we're not agile enough. So that's my closing word.
That's great. Thank you. And Derek, I realized we skipped over this. So in 1 minute, can you describe the
Good luck.
The small business task, the COVID small business task? I think that could be a model, and it sounds.
Yeah, I was actually going to touch on that, because that's something both Jeff and I are involved in, as well as our former Commerce Director Harold Epps and Kerry Kirkland, Deputy General Secretary.
And Economy League Board member.
Yes, and Della Clark and Jennifer Rodriguez from the Hispanic Chamber, former Councilmember George Burrell, a number of community stakeholders. But the small diverse business community task force was an entity that kind of came together, initially spearheaded by Michael Brown, an entrepreneur who's been in Philadelphia and also in Florida, doing a lot of FEMA work in Florida and Puerto Rico, and saw how those dollars come together from an emerging management perspective. So as we started going into the very beginning of COVID-19, he saw the need to put together a task force to bring people together with various type of skills and abilities and relationships, and also identified what are some of the needs that are going to be needed, and where the spend is going to come from the federal government and the state government regarding emergency needs. So one area is sterilization, sanitation. So he was able to identify equipment and a process, and also reach out to various African-American entrepreneurs in the Philadelphia region, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh, and be able to work with them with this sanitation process. There's been some recent conversations regarding SEPTA opening up, and we did a demonstration that was covered on a lot of local media, how we were able to sanitize at a low cost using that equipment, and now using that ability to bring in minority companies into the spend with FEMA dollars and PEMA dollars, and also further their relationships with our transit authorities, and also provide a commercialization opportunity for them with large businesses in the region. So that's something we started. We're looking at other phases of that. And that goes back to the concept I started with Dr. Ayla Stanford, and having that self-determination of African-American entrepreneurship to see a need and provide a service to the community.
And I just, to a couple other examples that you all mentioned, driving revenues to your diverse small businesses seems to be an emerging theme out of Philadelphia in the crisis. So it sounds like a longer term, mid to long-term recovery plan as well, which is great. Fiona, are there questions that folks have for the panelists?
Yes, there are. So we've had a lot of engagement and a lot of comments on the chat box. So first, shout out from Ali Jafar. Love the Economy League's work all around. The Page initiative is great, and as are the Leading Indicators newsletter and the Pivot web series you have out, Jeff. So
Thank you,
that is
Ali.
a shout
We're a
out.
mutual fan club.
Very nice.
And so the first question here is from Christopher Waters. How do we move from competition to cooperation when it comes to the response to COVID?
So is it competition to cooperation? I think that's something that's occurring right now. For example, I know at a local level, we have put together a budget working group. We're doing collaborative conversations with our members of the Philadelphia delegation in Harrisburg and also the Pennsylvania Congressional delegation. The fact that the small diverse business community task force is a diverse group of people from different backgrounds and skill sets coming together. You're seeing more and more of these things. I think the pandemic itself is starting to foster that collaboration and conversation that, but for this situation, certain groups I don't think would have come together. So I think we're using this as an opportunity. So it's something that will continue to go forward. I hope coming out of this, we're still continuing to use this collaborative spirit. It's almost like when we had the Amazon proposal, various entities came together to put together that proposal. The public sector, private sector, institutionals, all came together to do that. We need to have that same perspective going forward coming out of this pandemic, because all of us are gonna have to row in the same direction, because we're gonna have a lot of work to do to try to even get back to where we were before the pandemic.
Yeah, and not to totally toot our organization's horn, but I will anyway. Like, that's why we exist. We do cross-sector collaboration, and we're a network of networks. Public, private, nonprofit sectors all come together, particularly around our leadership exchange, but in everything we do. So one thing that I think differentiates Philadelphia from a lot of other places is we do have a pretty high level of collaboration in general, I think. I know that there's some folks who see this as a competitive, cutthroat place, but compared to other places that I know of, I think we do a somewhat better job. Again, we need to open the doors to civic participation. Like, there's a lot of exclusion for sure, but I think there is a collaborative spirit, certainly, that goes back to beyond the Amazon bid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being it's illustrated now. You see it in the press every day, that it's not just Philadelphia County that's talking about how they open up, but it's a regional approach. How do we open up the region? And and you've seen the governors talking to each other. How do we open up, states that are adjacent to each other? How do you open up sectors of the country that are associated? I mean, so I think we're seeing it. Again, to me, this is another pandemic Klieg-like moment where folks are really getting a light shined on. Either you collaborate or you don't come back. Like, there's only one path forward, and it's cooperation, collaboration, teamwork, and we got to figure this out together.
Wonderful. And so the next question here is from Ali Jafar. How might we make it easier to gain access to land that's publicly owned for, say, a community garden?
So that's a very specific question. Right before the pandemic hit, we were working on redoing the land bank's website. That should be up and operational, I believe, by the end of this month, early June, where it will make it much easier, and it will be much more customer friendly and intuitive to go on there and access land, particularly for a side yard or community garden or something like that. I would also say that any organization that has a 1-year garden agreement, we have automatically extended those agreements for an additional year given the pandemic, so that folks don't have to worry about how do I get, how do I re-up or whatever. But that should be coming, that new website should be unveiled, I would say, by the end of the month or early June.
Great. And there is a follow-up question. Ali says, Derek, what you mentioned is great. What other ways are cities in Pennsylvania working together productively? Or I guess in what ways could cities in Pennsylvania work together productively?
Well, I just know from our daily calls with the administration regarding the pandemic, there's been, as I said earlier, kind of a Wild Wild West scenario where various cities are bidding against each other for PPE equipment. The counties, so Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery County, Philadelphia, they have been talking collaboratively for weeks on how do we reopen. Just like you've heard at various states are doing it, like the Northeast Corridor and the West Coast Corridor. So those conversations have been occurring, especially from my health perspective on equipment and trying to do some purchasing initiatives together. So that is happening. Because Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods, we're also a region of neighborhoods. So if you leave Mount Airy, you're quickly going to be in Cheltenham and Flourtown. And so you can't just open Philadelphia separately, then you're going to open other parts of the region. So those conversations are occurring. I know before the pandemic, I was working on an initiative to bring all of our county elected officials together just to have a collaborative conversation on areas that we share from public health and public safety. I've had conversations with Dr. Monica Taylor from Delaware County regarding some issues that she's seen at the airport. I've also seen. So we're doing that. I think we're going to continue to do that. And it's something that's going to benefit all of us when we provide that space for collaboration to work collectively. There's no right way to fix a pothole. And that's why I'm involved in a lot of different organizations to see what are some of the best practices in other parts of the Commonwealth and other parts of the country, and how we can bring that back to Philadelphia so we can share collectively together.
I'd like to just add one thing to that. Like, the Economy League used to sort of be the backbone for this organization called the Metropolitan Caucus, which actually grew out of our leadership exchange in Chicago in 2005, when then Councilman Nutter came with us to Chicago, and he saw what Richie Daley was doing there to bring together the Chicagoland municipalities. And we had it up and going for a while, but there was sort of a scale and scope mismatch. Like, Pennsylvania has so many municipalities, right? And county government does not have the same kind of power the city of Philadelphia does. So putting city council members in the same room with county council members was not as productive as it might have been. So we're talking to some folks, the chamber and elsewhere, about pulling back together the Metropolitan Caucus, but with the municipal leadership from these other places, right? We've identified the 100 townships and government entities within the 5 counties that really need to be in the room with our city leadership, so that we can actually be talking sort of among equivalent political actors and figure out where we can come to like some policy overlaps. And of course, Derek would be an incredible asset to that with all of the cross-cutting organizations that he belongs to. So that's something obviously it's on a bit of a hold right now, but something we've been talking to a bunch of people about reviving under our Policy Hub initiative, which is where the Leading Indicators newsletter.
Great. Fiona, thank you. That was great. And I don't know if there's a way for folks to submit questions offline or in a chat room or a green room somewhere. But I wanted to just let the panel close, in the spirit of not letting a crisis go to waste. What a quick call to action to the folks on the line, whether it's investors, entrepreneurs, other folks in government, nonprofits. What's a 30-second call to action from each of you?
And you should go first.
All right. So I didn't get a chance to touch on this, but food access. Really? There is no reason why anybody in this country should not have access to food. That was a total breakdown in our supply chain. And again, we need to think about this differently. We already know that food can be delivered almost anywhere, but we've seen our online delivery and food service break down, that it doesn't have the capacity. Let's build the capacity, and let's make sure that people who get SNAP or EBT or the food stamp program, if you will, that they have access to online delivery. There should be no food deserts in this country, in this state, in this city, anywhere at all. Get on it.
Amen. Let's not defund the Office of Workforce Development and the Commerce Department's support for minority business development. It's the wrong time to do that. We need to be investing money. The city's poverty action plan makes that very clear. You know, you can't put out a document in February and then completely defund it in May. We know there's fiscal challenges. Let's borrow some money with 0 interest rates. Let's do the thing. Let's make the investments we need to make to bring it to, so that we're not behind where we were when this crisis started. And we have an opportunity to use this crisis to start to solve some of the very, very deep problems that we've faced around equity and inclusion, and again, minority business and Black and brown owned business growth and formation. Let's do it. Let's just do it. And city government has to be an incredibly important actor in this process, along with the private sector and philanthropy. I mean, we have billions of dollars, billions in philanthropic dollars. Let's mobilize them.
And I think also, you know, this is a crisis, but it's an opportunity to identify businesses and services that are not being provided due to this pandemic. And I think the pandemic has brought a clear light on that. And so we should provide those opportunities and make those investments where we can create new businesses, new industry, the whole shared economy in industries like Uber and Airbnb. Years ago, people never even thought about that. So this pandemic is providing opportunity to see those things. And when I look at you know, everything, I see business opportunities from, you know, Jeff's glasses, someone manufactured those glasses and procured those lenses, to the button on Ann's shirt, to the railing, Dennis, in your background. Someone, you know, put together that wood, someone made the paint. And so
Correct.
From those people who are on the call, think about these opportunities to help businesses. And also, there are businesses run by Black and brown individuals that can provide a great return of investment, and you make a great profit, much more than you can ever think of. I think about John Malone, who was the head of TCI, partnered with a lobbyist by the name of Robert Johnson. Next thing you know, they started BET. A $10,000 investment became a multi-billion-dollar return. So I say that to say the opportunity for returns on investment are going to be with these companies you may have not thought of, who are providing solutions to these issues that came out of this pandemic and going forward.
We call at ImpactAlpha, we call it returns on inclusion, and it sounds like it'll be key.
That's a good one.
So with that, thank you guys. I said I won't drag you back for a Zoom happy hour, but we'd love to grab a beer when it's all over. Back in Philadelphia.
Well, it is 5 o'clock somewhere, according to Buffett.
That's a new version of George. New version of the George Thorogood song, "I Drink Alone," but on Zoom, right?
Thank you to 17 Asset Management and Impact PHL, and to the rest of the folks participating in the conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care. Be safe and be healthy.
Well, everybody, be well.
Stay sane.